Good for. The Rebbe began the Farbrengen this afternoon. Famous quotation, Poischim bidvar malchus, that it's appropriate to begin with a dvar malchus with a saying of melachim. And as Chazal go on, man malke rabbono. So it's suitable to begin with something, the Rebbe says, which is a quotation from the rabbono. If we have a choice, the Rebbe goes on, where to select from the quotation which the Rebbe would like to begin the Farbrengen with, he says there are many inyanim of Torah that we can select from the Chachamim, from the Rabbeim, from the various Rabbeim, to select from their teachings what to begin the Farbrengen with. However, the Rebbe says most appropriate and what has the strongest shaychus to us would be to begin the Farbrengen with a quotation, with an inyan from the Frierdiker Rebbe. And obviously the reason, the Rebbe goes on, because this week we celebrated the Yom HaHilula, the Yortzeit of the Frierdiker Rebbe, which was on 10 days of Shvat, and now is the Shabbos after this Yom HaHilula. And the Shabbos after anything that happens, in other words, the following Shabbos always has the advantage that it elevates all the inyanim that transpire throughout the entire week. And here the Rebbe referred at length to what's discussed in Chassidus, and the Tzemach Tzedek discusses it at length, how Vayechulu Hashamayim V'Oretz V'Chol Tzvoer, what we say B'Negei Shabbos, means that all the inyanim, when it comes to Shabbos, it comes into the level, into Madrega of an Oinig, of a Tainug. Everything becomes uplifted spiritually, and it comes to a very high level. It comes to a very high level of a spiritual uplifting, and all this takes place on Shabbos. So it uplifts all the inyanim that took place throughout the entire week. So Mamela, this Shabbos is the Shabbos that there is a Kiloyon, V'Tainug, and an Aliyah to the day of Yud Shvat as well. So Mamela, the Rebbe goes on, if we want to look for an appropriate inyan to be Peseach the Farbrengen with, to fulfill the idea of Peischem B'Dvar Malchus, it's most appropriate to do it with one of the sayings of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And this whole first Sikha of today's Farbrengen went as an introduction to the Peischem B'Dvar Malchus, to the inyan which the Rebbe wanted to quote from the Frierdiker Rebbe, which the Rebbe did in the second Sikha of the Farbrengen. And throughout the entire first Sikha, it was an at length introduction to it. And here the Rebbe referred to the inyan which is also written in the writings of the Frierdiker Rebbe, where the Frierdiker Rebbe writes that once a child reaches the age of 3, a child is trained with saying, Meidani lefanecha daily. So the Frierdiker Rebbe writes it, the Rebbe says, B'negei a child, when the child becomes age 3 and up. However, the Rebbe says, now it's the custom to be mahadran mina mahadran, to do more yet than what the Rebbe writes in this letter. And not only do we do this when a child reaches the age of 3, but even prior to that. Once a child is at an age of mishatinuk, mishamaschil, adaber, once a child begins and is able of talking, it's appropriate to train the child daily to say, Meidani lefanecha. What is the contents of Meidani lefanecha? The contents of this tefillah is that we are addressing ourselves lefanecha. Whom do we mean by lefanecha? The Rebishter. But we don't refer to the Rebishter here by any other title other than lefanecha, you Rabbeinu Shalom. And the Rebbe says this is so known. Whom do we mean by lefanecha? That even a child, normally a child, as we see by nature, a child, whenever a child is told of something, a child many times has questions, and child always asks another question and another question. This is the nature of a child, that a child is always curious and asking questions. However, a child, when the child is told of the existence of the Rabbeinu Shalom, and the child is told the contents of this tefillah, what is being meant by saying Moida ani lefanecha, and the Rebbe explained, obviously we could have said the same tefillah, ani moida lefanecha. Ani moida lefanecha would bring out the same idea, the same contents, that I am Meida lefanecha to you, Rabbeinu Shalom. But the Rebbe says, no, we don't begin with the ani. We don't begin with ani meaning oneself. We begin with the Meida ani. In other words, even the child is already immediately being trained that ani is secondary. Usually a person looks upon himself that he is ani, he is top priority. However, in this case it is not so. What is the proper education which a Jewish child is given? That the ani comes later. And first comes the maida that the child is being trained in the realization of the existence of the Rabbeinu Shalom. And this is said, lifanecha, directing himself to the Eibishter. And not as the Eibishter is known by any titles of Hashem, Elokim, and all the Zayin, Shemesh, Shein, and Mchokim. We know, Al Pi Halacha, the Eibishter has 7 names, and neither of these 7 names are allowed to be erased. Here we are addressing ourselves to the Eibishter as Lefanecha Yu Rabbeinu Shalom. Just like Chassidus explains Benegea the name of Anoichi, how the Eibishter began the Aseres HaDibros. So Aseres HaDibros begin, Anoichi Hashem Elokecha. So Chassidus also explains that this shame of Anoichi is higher than any other definition of the Eibishter. Meaning Anoichi, the lois rames, this is a quotation of the Zohar, which is quoted often in Chassidus, the lois rames, loi b'shum ois, v'loi b'shum koitz. There's no other way of revealing this name other by expressing it in the word Anoichi, I. The same thing here. When child is trained, that the first words that he says when he opens his eyes in the morning, it's Maidani lefanecha. This is an expression where each and every child addresses himself directly to the Eibishter. And to what level of the Eibishter? To such a high level that cannot be expressed in any other title. Cannot be expressed in any of the Zayin, Shemesh, Shein, and Mchakim. It's directed to the Eibishter in such a pchina of lefanecha to you, Rabbeinu Shalom, as we know that this Maidani is recited even before we pour Negelvas on. All this shows that this is such a level that no Tumah, no Ruach Tumah can have any effect there. And this is the highest association of a Yid with the Rabbeinu Shalom. And this begins with the very early childhood of a child, even before the child becomes 3 years old. As soon as a child is able of talking, a child is trained that he must address the Rabbeinu Shalom every day in such a manner of Maidani lefanecha. And after this whole at length introduction, the Rebbe referred to a maimah of the Frierdiker Rebbe, which the Frierdiker Rebbe gave out 33 years ago in Tafshin Tes in 1949, also for this Shabbos of Yud Gimel Shvat. And in 1949, Yud Gimel Shvat Tafshin Tes was also on a Shabbos, and it was also Shabbos Parshas Beshalach. So the Kviyas in that year was like in this year, Yud Gimel Shvat, 13 days in Shvat, was also on Shabbos, and on Shabbos Parshas Beshalach. And for that day, 33 years ago, the Frierdiker Rebbe gave out a maimah. The Rebbe Bechlal mentioned that there is a special significance in the number of 33. First of all, we find 33 coincides with the idea of Lag Baima, and Ben Negea Lag Baima, it's explained in Chassidus that it has a shaykhis to the pasuk Gal Einai Va'abita Niflois Mitorasecha, which means the idea of revealing Pnimius HaTorah, which this is the whole inyan of Lag Baima, because the whole inyan of Lag Baima has a shaykhis to Rashbi, whose inyan was to be Megala Pnimius HaTorah. And this maimah was given out by the Frierdiker Rebbe 33 years ago. Incidentally, Yud Gimel Shvat today, this is the Yortzeit of the Frierdiker Rebbe's mother, the Rebbetzin Stern Masara. So that was the occasion why the Frierdiker Rebbe gave out a maimah for this Shabbos, 13 days in the month of Shvat, because that was the Yortzeit of his mother, the Rebbetzin of the Rebbe Rashab. The maimah begins on a pasuk in this week's Sedre, Vayavei Amalek, Vayalochem im Yisrael b'Refidim, which talks about Amalek's confrontation with the Yidden, and he had Mulchama with the Yidden in Refidim. And then the pasuk goes on, Vayoyma Moshe el Yeshua, Pchalonu Anoshim, select us the proper people, V'tzei Hilochem ba'Amalek, and go ahead and have Mulchama with Amalek. So first of all, in the Maimah, the Frierdiker Rebbe refers to the Gemara, that why is this place called Refidim? And the Frierdiker Rebbe refers to the Chazal, that Chazal tell us that Refidim is from the expression Sherofu Yideyem Medivrei Torah. The Yidden weakened themselves from Torah, and Mamela, being that they weakened themselves from an association with Torah, this made it possible for Amalek to be able to start up with the Yidden. In other words, had the Yidden been closely associated with Torah, then Amalek wouldn't have been able to have any shlita on them, Amalek wouldn't be able to start up with them. However, being that Rafu Yidei Medivrei Torah, this made it possible for Amalek to be able to come and have Melchama with the Yidden. So Takalena and the Farbrengen, the Sikha afterward, the Rebbe referred to a question, what's the Pshat Sharafu Yidei Medivrei Torah? The Yidden have loosened their hands from Divrei Torah. Torah obviously is an inyan which we have to learn. Torah is an inyan of Chachma v'Seichel, which we have to involve our mind, our intellect, to understand Torah. So if so, what's the Lashon Chazal Sharafu Yidei Medivrei Torah? The Rebbe explained this, because we know that the whole idea of Torah is Gadol Talmud Shemei V'Lidei Ma'aseh. What's the whole greatness in learning? So that learning should bring to action the fulfillment of mitzvahs. The Yidden, at this time, when Amalek came and was able to have Melchama with Yidden, it was Rafu Yidei Medivrei Torah as the Pshat, because being that the whole idea of Torah is not just Torah should remain as an inyan of learning, as an inyan as Chachma v'Seichel. The whole idea of Torah is that Torah should be brought into action, into the fulfillment of mitzvahs as well. And action is already something which is expressed in the idea of Yadayim. Memela, the Yidden here were on a level of Rafu Yidei Medivrei Torah the Pshat. They were not involved in the they weakened themselves from the learning of Torah, but Derech Memela as well from the fulfillment of mitzvahs, which normally is supposed to come as a result of learning Torah. However, here the Yidden were in a position that they loosened themselves from Torah. Memela, this made it possible for Amalek to be able to come and be able to start up with the Yidden. So the Rebbe referred to this Maimah, where the Frierdiker Rebbe raises the question, what is the Lashon Tzei Hilochem Ba'Amalek? Moshe Rabbeinu was told, Vayema Moshe al Yeshua, Moshe commanded Yeshua that Yeshua should select people, V'tzei Hilochem Ba'Amalek, and go out and have Melchama with Amalek. So the Rebbe raised the question, being that many people were selected to take part in the war with Amalek, so why is there a Lashon Tzei, which Tzei is a Lashon Yochet? The expression in the pasuk should have been Tzeu, which is a plural expression, not an expression of Tzei, which is singular. The Rebbe went on explaining that this whole idea of Amalek, this is something which is eternal. In other words, this isn't a one-time Melchama, which was an individual Amalek that came and had Melchama with Yidden. However, this is something which Yidden have a constant Melchama with Amalek. And as the pasuk says, the whole idea of Amalek was Anshe Kolcha Baderech. So Chassidus teaches, what's the Pshat Anshe Kolcha Baderech? So teaches the word Kolcha also has a shaychus. Kar means cold, Krirus. The whole idea of Amalek was that he cooled off the Yidden. The Yidden at that time came out of Mitzrayim. And maybe the Yidden was so inspired with the great miracles which the Rebbe has performed. And the Rebbe has shown them, what did Amalek do? Amalek came and cooled off the Yidden. Amalek's whole idea was, as Chassidus explains, the word Amalek is bigematria suffix, doubt. If we take the lettering that spell Amalek, and we take the numerical value of each letter, and we do the same with the word suffix, which means doubt, we will get the same total. So this is the whole idea of Amalek. Amalek came, he cooled the Yidden, he wanted to instill doubt in the Yidden. This was the whole inyan of Amalek. Memela, this is something which Amalek did at that time when the Yidden went out of Mitzrayim. However, as well, there's a constant Amalek, there's Melchama Lashem Ba'Amalek Midoir Doir. As today's Sedra concludes, this means there's an eternal Melchama with Amalek. In other words, even today, nowadays, there's also the concept of an Amalek. In other words, at times when we get cooled off b'negei inyanim of Torah mitzvahs, when we get cooled off b'negei inyanim of Yiddishkeit, and we come to various thoughts of having doubts fall into our minds. Should we do this or shouldn't we do so? All this is created by this Amalek, and Memela, this is a constant Melchama with Amalek. Memela, when we are told in the pasuk, V'tzei hilochem ba'Amalek, the pasuk uses a singular expression, go out and have Melchama with Amalek, it's because the pasuk is addressing himself to each and every Yid. Because each and every Yid has a constant Melchama with Amalek. And the Rebbe is telling us through Moshe, Yeshua, B'char lanu anoshim, select the people for us. And as Rashi comments, who are proper people to have Melchama with Amalek? It's Anshe Moshe. those people that have a shaykhs to Moshe, the manhig Hader, this gives them strength and koiches. They should be able to supersede Amalek and have Milchama with Amalek. So that these people, the Pasuk is telling us, and the Pasuk is addressing himself to each and every Yid, that every Yid should know, say Hilochem ba'Amalek, go out and have Milchama with Amalek. There's a constant Milchama with Amalek which is going on constantly. Rabbi said that in this Maimah, the expression Hakol Hoylech Achar Achitum, everything goes after the close. We look at the end of the Inyan, and at the end of this Maimah, the Frierdiker Rebbe discusses the Inyan of Yisrael, Yesh Shishim Ribu Oisi Yisla Torah, that every Yid has his letter in Torah. And here there's an expression in the Maimah of the Frierdiker Rebbe, V'lachein nogu kol Yisrael lichta veis b'Torah. And that's why it's a custom that every Yid should write a nois in Torah. The Rebbe says this is extremely appropriate to talk about today, because the Rebbe says recently, for the past couple of months, we've been so involved in talking about the importance, about the Inyan of Sefer Torah, and here we find it in a Maimah from the Frierdiker Rebbe, where the Frierdiker Rebbe also talks about this great Inyan, that every Yid should have an ois in Sefer Torah. Rebbe said, so it's appropriate again to remind everyone and alert everyone about the greatness, about the Inyan of Sefer Torah, and to see to it that each and every Yid Taka has an us in Sefer Torah. And this applies to men and women, and not only men and women, but children and youngsters. The Rebbe referred, as soon as a child is born, to see to it that this child gets an us in Sefer Torah. This is an Inyan of extreme and vital importance, the Rebbe went on. And B'negeya, this is B'negeya Miftzah Sefer Torah. And here the Rebbe spoke in general, B'negeya Miftzah Torah as well. This is the Rebbe said for quite a few years, he's talking about an Inyan of Miftzah Torah, which means a campaign for learning Torah. The Rebbe said when we're talking about a campaign for learning Torah, it doesn't mean that an individual should sit down only, that an individual should sit down in his house and have a kviyas itim l'Torah. This is not sufficient. First of all, he says there are many people that are talented and gifted, that they should be able to relate in Yonim of Torah to others as well. So when we're talking about Miftzah Torah, it doesn't mean only that a person should learn Torah on his own. It means that it's our obligation to reach out and see to it that every Yid should learn Torah, and especially taking into consideration the great Inyan of Torah berabim. How great the Inyan of Limud HaTorah is when each and every individual learns Torah. There's a special significance to Torah when Torah is learned in public. The Rebbe says that he's stressing for quite a few years already, with a great bakosha, strong request to see to it that Yidden should learn Torah. And here the Rebbe said, at times we shouldn't. Rebbe said we have to look at it that the fact of learning Torah with a Yid, not getting involved into other inyanim and not getting involved discussing other inyanim, but merely just bringing a Yid close to Torah, this is also a tremendous inyan in itself. Memela creating kviyas itim l'Torah, especially where Torah is going to be learned by Rabbim, which is a tremendous inyan which supersedes by far the inyan of learning Torah b'yochid. And here a person sees that can bring about his qualifications if one has the qualification of being a Baal Masbir and bringing about in Yonim of Torah and seeing to it that his knowledge of Torah is shared with others, and especially when it's done in a format of Asara, which this comes into the level of Torah berabim, this is a tremendous inyan. The Rebbe says, and when he's talking constantly about the idea of Miftzah Torah, which this is one of the strongest Miftzahim, which the Rebbe is talking about for the last couple of years, what he primarily means, not only that any and every individual should learn Torah, but primarily it means to create kviyas itim b'Torah berabim, so that should be the idea of learning Torah berabim. And here the Rebbe, this occasion, also mentioned all the other miftzayim and asked everybody it's a proper time to strengthen ourselves again and to get involved in all the miftzayim, Saidis miftzayim, b'negei male, in the binyan of miftzayim that involve females as well, the inyan of kashrus achilo ishti and the inyan of taras hamishpacha and the inyan of neira Shabbos kodesh, to see to it to reach out to as many Yidden as possible, that they should be involved in this idea of being involved in all of the 10 miftzayim and all of these miftzayim. Later in the Farbrengen, as usual, the Rebbe learned a Rashi in this week's Sedre. But before we go to the Rashi, the Rebbe also spoke a Hemshach to what he spoke in the Farbrengen of Yud Shvat. In the Farbrengen of Yud Shvat, the Rebbe made a siyum on Masechta Shabbos. And as the Rebbe himself expressed himself, as it's a custom, the last couple of Farbrengens, when the Rebbe makes a siyum, what he does is, he makes a siyum on the Masechta as it is in Talmud Bavli, and compares it as the same Masechta is in Talmud Yerushalmi as well. So this is what the Rebbe did in the Farbrengen of Yud Shvat. Today he said he would just like to add on one more inyan in the siyum. Masechta Shabbos concludes the very last piece of Gemara with an incident. Ule ikla la beireish gelusa. Say the piece of Gemara. Gemara tells us it took place in Bavel, that Ule came into the home, to the residence of the Reish Gelusa. Reish Gelusa is the one who was the head of all the Yidden in Golus. Chazia la Rabbe bar Avhuna. He saw Rabbe bar Avhuna, the Yosef ba'avna de Maya. He was sitting, as Rashi learns Pshat, in a pail full of water. This was on a Shabbos. The Kamoshachlei. Now the Gemara here comes behemshech to what we learned in the Mishnah. Mishnah tells us here, Midivrayam lamadnu, the last Mishnah Masechta Shabbos, shepoikikin umoidedin v'koishrin b'Shabbos. This is halachas in Shabbos, that we're allowed to take measurements, or we're allowed to make a kesher, not a kesher shel kayam. In other words, a bow which is a knot, we're not allowed to make on Shabbos. But something which is not a permanent knot, we are allowed to make on Shabbos. So he came in, Ula came, and he saw Rabbi in this position, and he saw him taking measurements. So he says, Amalei, he told him, Eima da amre Rabbanon medida de mitzvah. What type of measurement did the Chachamim say we're allowed to do on Shabbos? We're allowed to do measurements that have a shaychus to mitzvah. The lav mitzvah mi yamo, such type of a measurement which has no shaychus to a mitzvah. Were the Chachamim matter to do this on Shabbos? Amalei, so he responded back to him, Misasek be'almano. What I'm doing is really, I'm not doing it for any special intention. Sarasha Taiches, what's the pshat misasek? Shaloi l'tzeirach. It's not for any special intention. Elo le'asuke ba'alma. I'm just doing this to keep myself busy, so to speak. This is an incident which the Gemara tells us, which Rabbe responded that way to Ula. The Rebbe says, let us not forget, we're talking in Gemara, and we're talking about personality like Rabba. The Rebbe said that Sfarim tell us that side the name Rove and side the name Rabba, it's not their name. Their name was Reb Abba. But Reb Abba was combined, and that's why we refer to it as Rove or Rabba. But it was individuals whose name was Reb Abba. So in other words, we're talking about such type of people who had the title Reb, to such an extent that was incorporated into one word, Rave or Rabbe, and Torah refers to them by this name. In other words, Torah gives them this honor, referring to Rabbe or to Rave by the title Reb Abba. Here in this case, we're talking about Rabbe. What did Rabbe tell him? That I'm not measuring, my measurement is takanat for a cause of mitzvah, but I'm still doing this as a misasek. Rabbe says in halacha we find the inyan of misasek. There's an inyan of misasek b'chalovim va'aroyes, which is an inyan halacha, which has to do if somebody eats chaylev. Chaylev we know we're not allowed to eat. So if somebody says he's not eating it intentionally, he's just swallowing it, but it's not with the intention of eating chaylev. So halacha is, this doesn't mean a thing. As long as he's eating it, it's considered that he's eating it. Misasek is no excuse by eating chaylev. As well as by aroyes, it's also misasek b'chalav and v'aroyes chayiv. The Gemara says shekeinan. Rabbi says, let's realize what's happening here. He's going to ask a question on this episode which took place. The Rabbi says it's really a strange type of question. It's a type of question which in derech halimud of yeshivas, it's really uncommon to ask such type of a kasha. But still, it's something which requires explanation. And that is, the Rabbi says, there's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. It's so famous that anybody that recites Pirkei Avos is aware of this Mishnah. And not only is it a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, but it's quoted in halacha as well. It's halacha in Shulchan Aruch. What is the halacha? Kol ma'asecha yiyu l'shem shamayim. Whatever a yid does, has to be l'shem shamayim. In other words, a Yid cannot say he's doing something stam without any cause, without any reason. He's stam in the world doing it. He cannot say that. Here we are talking about a person who's a personality like Rabbi Bar Avuna. And Rabbi Bar Avuna was sitting in Shabbos and taking and measuring. Ula asked them, how come? Chachamim told us, we're only allowed to measure l'shem mitzvah, and obviously what you're doing is not l'shem mitzvah. So he responded to him, true, it's not l'shem mitzvah, but it's not for any other special cause either. It's only done as a mesasik. I'm just doing it le'asuke ba'alma, just to keep myself busy. Rabbi says, how is this possible? If we're talking by a Yid who's living up to all the standards of Shulchan Aruch, we're talking about a personality like Rabbi definitely fulfilled what Pirkei Avos tells us. Kol ma'asecha yu l'shem shamayim. All your actions have to be l'shem shamayim. So how come Rabbi should say that what I'm doing has no reason for it? I'm doing something stam in the Welt. Rabbi raised this question today, Farbrengen, but did not give any response on it.
He raised the question but no answer.
He didn't answer it. I don't know whether it's because it was late or whether the Rebbe will answer it at another occasion. Maybe it's one of the upcoming Farbrengens. But the Rebbe really took apart this question, but did not answer it. Ula is the fellow that met him in this position. Also an Amoira. So we're talking about something which took place between two Amoirayim. And again, Rabbi Bar Avuna was a person who... he was an Amoira. Talking about this Inyan already, and the Rebbe also compared as Masechta Shabbos is completed in the Bavli, as well as Masechta Shabbos is completed in the Yerushalmi. So the Rebbe said that this, didn't talk about it at length today, he spoke about it Yud Shvat, but Yud Shvat, the Rebbe raised the question that at the end of Masechta Bavli in Yerushalmi, we do not find the same finishing as we find, same completion as we find it here in the Bavli. Rebbe said that there are some that he received correspondence between Yud Shvat and Shabbos, that there were some that wanted to say that we know that unfortunately many parts of Talmud Yerushalmi got lost. And Memela, we don't have it. The reason we don't have it in our text of Yerushalmi is because the Yidden in those days went through various gzeres and various shmodes, persecrations, and Memela, they were left without, many of the pieces of Talmud Yerushalmi got lost. So Memela, the Rebbe said, the question was asked to him, the Rebbe raised the question Yud Shvat. Why is it that Talmud Yerushalmi Masechta Shabbos does not conclude the same way, with the same halachas as Talmud Bavli? Perhaps Talmud Yerushalmi had the same conclusion. However, the reason we don't have it now in our text of Yerushalmi is very simple, because it got lost, and we don't have copy of this text that got lost, just like many other halakim of Yerushalmi got lost. The Rebbe said that he does not want to accept such an approach. Why? Because he referred to a pasuk, Kilo Yitesh Hashem Amoy, V'nachlosei lo Yazev. He says, the Rebbe will not leave us go, Lo Yitesh Hashem Amoy, V'nachlosei lo Yazev. The Mele, the Rebbe says, when we are forced to give such type of an interpretation, what's the pshat we are forced? For example, if we find in one of the old-time Svarim, we find a quotation from Yerushalmi, and now we go to our text of Yerushalmi and we see it's not there. So the Rebbe says, in such type of a case we are forced, we have no other breira. We have no other choice. We must say that this Rishon that quotes the Yerushalmi, he had it in his text of Yerushalmi. But throughout the various gezeres that Yidden lived through, certain pieces of Yerushalmi got lost, and this piece is one of them. Memela, we have no other alternative but to accept this logic that certain pieces of Yerushalmi got lost. However, the Rebbe said, to go ahead and say look at Chila without any grounds, if we find the difference between Bavli and Yerushalmi, we'll say, well, there's no difference in this case between Bavli and Yerushalmi. Really, Yerushalmi says the same thing as Bavli. But the reason we don't have it in Yerushalmi is because many parts of Yerushalmi got lost. The Rebbe said this is not a derech in learning. Where we have ground to say this, in other words, where we find any one of the Rishonim quoting a certain piece of Yerushalmi which we don't have, then there's no breira. However, Rabbi says, just out of our own, to go ahead wherever we have a question regarding some sort of a contradiction between Bavli and Yerushalmi, we will use our own approach and say, well, really Bavli and Yerushalmi hold the same, but the reason it doesn't appear in Yerushalmi is because this piece of Yerushalmi got lost throughout the ages and throughout all the trials and tribulations, throughout all the problems, Rebbe says this is not a proper approach in learning. And then the Rebbe went on learning a Rashi in this week's Seder. The Rashi is in the beginning of the Shira. This Pasuk Gimel, the third Pasuk of Shiras Oz Yashir. Pasuk says, Hashem ish milchama, Hashem shemoi. Let us look into Rashi. Rashi comments, Hashem shemoi. What's the pshat? Hashem shemoi. Rashi says, Milchamoisav loy biklei zayin. The Rebishter's milchames are not with ammunition. Ela bishmoi hu nilcham. The Rebishter has milchama with his name. His name is sufficient. K'moshe Amar David, as David said, V'anoichi ba elecha b'shem Hashem tzavokos. David said, when David had the battle with Goliath, he also said he's coming to him in the name of Hashem. So we see that the name of Hashem, this in itself is like a sort of an ammunition. This is one pirush Rashi says. Dovaracha, another pshat in Rashi. What means Hashem Shemoi? Af b'shah shehu nilcham v'noikem me'oyevav. Even at times when the Rebishter is involved in battle and taking revenge from his enemies, oichis hu b'midasai l'rachem al bruav v'lozayin es kol boyoyl. At the same time, the Rebishter is involved in two things. He's involved in Mulchama, and at the same time as well, he's feeding all the needy. Not like human being kings. When he's involved in a Mulchama, he's involved in the Mulchama totally and not involved in anything else. And he doesn't have koyach to do both. Hashem is different. Rebbe says if we were to take apart this Rashi, there are many questions in this Rashi. First of all, why is there a need for Rashi to give two interpretations, two commentaries? That's number one. Secondly, Rebbe asked question, first of all, why does Rashi quote the pasuk in K'moshe Amar David, V'noichi ba elecha b'shem Hashem tzavokos? There's another pasuk, which is a very popular pasuk. In fact, the Rebbe said, we just recited it today, as the takon of the Frierdiker Rebbe is, that any day that we don't say Tachnun, we should say the capital of Lamenatzeach Yancha before the Yom Tilim, so, which is capital Chav and Tilim, and in that capital we say, Eila barechev, ve'eila basusim, v'nachnu b'shem Hashem Elokeinu naskim, which brings about the same thought, that whoever goes with rechev and sus, various types of physical things, however, what we do is b'shem Hashem Elokeinu, which is the same idea, obviously, as the pasuk which Rashi is quoting from Shmuel, which David said, "V'noichi ba elecha b'shem Hashem tzavokos." Another question which the Rebbe asked: what's the pshat milchamoisav loy biklei zayin? Rashi says the Rebishter's milchama is not with any type of ammunition. Because let us not go far. We are learning Parshas Beshalach now. Right here in Parshas Beshalach, right here in the Shira, we have just learned that the Rebishter has taken all the Mitzrim that have chased the Yidden, and the Rebishter drowned them in the Yam Suf. So the Rebishter used ammunition, so to speak, the Yam, and through the Yam, the Rebishter drowned them. So what's the pshat milchamoisav loy biklei zayin? If we look into this Sedra, and we see how the Rebishter penalized the Mitzrim, how he punished them, what he did was he killed them in the Yam, which is also a sort of a klei zayin. What's the pshat? Loy biklei zayin. Then into the second pshat of Rashi. Second pshat of Rashi, this is a question which he's going to ask, which he imagined, he doesn't think it was asked by any Melamed, by any Rebbe, who's learning with his children Chumash. He says, when Rashi wrote his Perush, Rashi lived in France. And if we look at the history of the time when Rashi lived, it was also a time when the country Rashi lived in was also involved in various wars and various battles. And the child who is learning Pshat and Chumash, is also well aware that there are times when various countries get involved into certain wars, into certain battles and so forth. However, the child who's learning this Chumash is also well aware that at the same time that a country is involved in a Milchama, at the same time, in all the cities of the country or the nation are provided with all their material needs. Rashi tells us, the Eibishter is different than a Midas Malchei Adama. Midas Malchei Adama is when they're involved in a Melchama, they can't provide the needs of their nation. However, the Eibishter is Hashem Shemai. The Eibishter is that powerful that at the same time he's involved in a Melchama, but at the same time he sees that whoever needs should receive what he needs. And how is it in Malchei Adama? Obviously, when a child, if we were to take apart this Pshat and Rashi and approach it from a practical point of view, the Rebbe says, in every country it's that way. A country could be involved in a war and it's outside. However, inside of the country, throughout all the cities of the country, throughout all the villages of the country, throughout the entire nation, people have whatever they need. So that means the country at the same time is involved in a battle, and at the same with an enemy, and at the same time all the interior things which are needed within the government, within the country, are provided and taken care of. So the Rebbe is approaching this Rashi is as follows. Rebbe is learning Pshat. The reason why we have to come on to two Pshatim, and one Pshat is insufficient, is Pashat, the Rebbe says. Because the Pasuk is saying, Hashem ish milchama, Hashem shemai. And we want to learn Pshat, that Hashem shemai, meaning that the Rebishter's name, this is the ammunition which is used in Hashem's war. If so, the Pasuk should use the expression Bashem Shmoi, with a base in front of the Hashem. Hashem is an Ish Mulchama. Bashem, with the Shem Hashem, Shemoi, this is his Mulchama, this is his Klezai. Being that the Pasuk uses a different expression, Hashem Ish Mulchama, Eins. Then the Pasuk goes ahead and says Hashem Shemoi. This leads Rashi to say that we cannot learn in Pshutei Shel Mikra, the first Pshat is insufficient. There's something lacking in it. In other words, this is taka the main Pshat. However, there is a Shaila, but because of this Shaila, we have to come on to a second Pshat. And the second Pshat is the one that Rashi says later. However, being that in Rashi every word is extremely accurate, Rashi uses the expression, Loi kemidas malchei adama, kishu oisik b'mlachame. We know every word is extremely accurate. Naturally, when a country is involved in a war, the way the setup of a nation goes, certain ministers handle the foreign affairs, which means the war if it may be going on, and there are other people in the cabinet of the country and in the kingdom that handle and provide all the internal affairs and see to it that all the interior things should be handled and fulfilled properly. However, Rashi uses a different word. Let us look in what Rashi says. Rashi says, the Melech himself, when he is oisik b'milchama, when he is fully involved in milchama, that's the Lashon oisik. Chassidus always teaches the Lashon oisik, meaning when a person is fully involved into the thing, when the Melech is fully in oisik b'milchama, at that time the Melech, who is only a Melech bas of Adam, cannot be involved, seeing to it to provide his citizens with their other needs. And the Rebbe says a child who's learning Chumash can understand this very easily. The Rebbe says when children are in Cheder, they constantly hear an expression from their Rebbes, stop playing, because he can't be playing as well as learning. In other words, if a child plays, he can't learn. If he learns, he can't play. In other words, so the child knows, and he's always been hearing this thought that he can't be involved in two things at once. What's the pshat? The same thing by the Melech. The expression is kishu oisik b'milchama. When this Melech is fully involved himself, not only through his ministers and not only through his foreign ministers and through his generals, but when he himself is an oisik b'milchama, at that time he's paina atzmai mikol hasakim ve'im bekoyach lasizu v'zu. B'negeya, the other question the Rebbe answered, we find right away in the Pasuk Chaf Hei, which is before Revi. There's an expression the pasuk finishes off, Vayayim Mitzrayim onusam mipnei Yisrael ki Hashem nilcham lahem b'Mitzrayim. So that means that even the Mitzrim realized that the Mulchama which was going on, and the battle which was going on, and all the punishments which they were getting were handled directly by Hashem. The Mela, it means that, so we see from here that even the Goyim realized that in the entire Mehumah, the entire organization which was going on, this organization, because of the constant punishments which the Rebishter was bringing on the Mitzrim, they realize that this is something that Hashem nilcham lahem. It's a mulchame it's a Hashem's mulchame. Mela, this is also the pshat, the pasuk Hashem ish mulchama. This coincides with the same thought as the Mitzrim themselves realized, which the pasuk says Hashem nilcham lahem b'Mitzrayim. It's the Rebishter who having this mulchame. B'negeya, why Rashi brings the pasuk of Anochi bo'elecha b'shem Hashem tzavokos. And Rashi does not bring the pasuk which we say in davening when we say Tilim, Eila berecha ve'eila besusim v'nachnu b'shem Hashem Elokeinu naskir. Rebbe says these are two different approaches. When we look carefully into this incident, when David had his problem with Goliath, he said, Anochi bo'elecha b'shem Hashem tzavokos. But at the same time, David had his little stones which he threw at Goliath. Meaning, on one hand, he relied on the Rebishter, as he expressed himself, but at the same time, he did certain natural things in order to succeed over Goliath. However, when we're talking in the pasuk, Eila berecha ve'eila basusim v'nachnu b'shem Hashem Elokeinu naskir, here it's a level where we are not doing anything physically. It's just relying on the Rebbe. The Rebbe said there are various times that the anhagid, the attitude of Eila berecha ve'eila basusim v'nachnu b'shem Hashem Elokeinu naskir is required. For example, the Rebbe said, this is what the Gemara tells us, that when Yidden are living amongst Goyim, Yidden are living in Golas, and we're living amongst certain nations, stronger nations than Yidden are, there's an Indian of Altisgare B'umis, not to start up with these Goyim who are physically stronger than us. However, what we are supposed to do is rely on the Rebishter. Eila berecha ve'eila besusim v'nachnu b'shem Hashem Elokeinu naskir. However, when Yidden are in a stage of sakona, for example, the Rebbe says, if there is an area which until Yidden took over this area was used to shoot from that area on Yidden, as the Golan. And now Yidden have this area. And the question is, what type of an approach should Yidden take? Now naturally, here we are required, we are supposed to have fullest betachon in the Rebishter, that the Rebishter will protect us. However, at the same time, we are supposed to do all kinds of derech hateve dikinyonim, all kinds of inyonim, derech hateve, to protect ourselves and to make sure that Yidden are secured, nothing should happen to any Yid. And here the Rebbe referred to the famous halacha, the Rebbe keeps on referring to in Hilchah Shabbos. This is halacha in Hilchah Shabbos. The Rebbe says, Akum shetzaru ala yoris Yisrael. If there are Yidden living in a city, and Goyim are surrounding this city, and we know that the Goyim are not saying obvious, they're not saying beferish that their intention is to go after the Jewish lives. Even they are saying that what they are intending is iske kash v'teven. All they are intending is straw and property of Yidden. So here the halacha comes out and tells us that Yidden are supposed to go out on Shabbos. The Rebbe says, mind you, on Shabbos we are not allowed to be involved in any inyan of Milchama. However, at the same time, the same Torah that prohibits us from being involved in being associated with ammunition on Shabbos and tells us that we're not allowed to carry ammunition on Shabbos, this same Torah tells us that when it's a question of Akum Atzaru ala Yoris Yisrael, Goyim have surrounded cities that Yidden live in these cities, then not only are we allowed to, but it is beferish our obligation, and we are mechuyev to go ahead and get ammunition and get klei zayin, and go ahead to see to it and be ala mishmar, to be on guard, to see to it that Yidden should be protected and the Goyim shouldn't start up with Yidden in any way. Here the Rebbe says we come into the other halacha. Chalil of Shabbos achas kadesh yishmeru Shabbos es harbe. Why? Because enochaname we are doing something on this Shabbos, which this Shabbos this Shabbos Torah allows us to be mechalel the Shabbos. However, this is going to lead to it that we will be able, as a result, to observe many, many other Shabbos. The Rebbe said, so it seems that there are two stages, two horoas. At certain times there's taka requirement of Eila berecha, Eila besusim, v'nachnu b'shem Hashem Elokeinu naskir, only to rely on the Rebishter. However, at other times when Yidden are in sakona, and it's a sakana of Yidden which puts Yidden into danger, as the case of Akum Hatzor ala Yoris Yisrael, which is the beferish halacha in Shulchan Aruch, how Goyim would be surrounding cities that Yidden live in. Here we are beferish not only is it allowed, but we are obligated to do, and we are mechuyev to go ahead and get involved with klei zayin, with ammunition, to see to it that the goyim shouldn't have any shlita, any harm on the yid. Later in the Farbrengen, the Rebbe again referred to very strongly the inyan of Sefer Torah, and again alerted the importance of Sefer Torah. And we referred to the pasuk in Daniel, the famous pasuk that which is in the Sefer Daniel. Daniel says that a time will come that kol ha'kosuv b'sefer, everyone, time will come when Yamid Michael Sar HaGadol, when a great Sar, the great leader by Yidden, will rise. Referring to Michael, this is how the pasuk in Daniel expresses itself. Kol ha'nimtza kosuv b'sefer Yimolet, whoever will be written in the Sefer will be rescued. So the Rebbe, when the Rebbe spoke about this pasuk the first time, several months ago, the Rebbe referred to it that this is a remez, that whoever will have an ois in Sefer Torah, that having an ois in Sefer Torah brings to rescue and brings to help and protection for all those people that have an ois in the Sefer Torah. The Rebbe again alerted extremely strong to see to it that he says, Enochanam, several Sefer Torahs were on the process of being written, and one was already completed. But it's still our obligation to see to it that each and every Yid should be Yesh Shishim Ribu Oisi Yis LaTorah, that every Yid should have his Ois in Sefer Torah. And the Rebbe Farbrengen also gave a bottle of mashke to representative of the Sefer Torah committee in Eretz Yisrael. And the Rebbe said he would also give a bottle of mashke to a representative of the Sefer Torah committee in Chutz La'aretz. But nobody walked over. From Eretz Yisrael, there's someone here, the Rav of Nachlas HaChabad, who is a member of the Sefer Torah committee of Eretz Yisrael. However, no one else walked over. The Rebbe smiled and he said what he would have to do is make elections. And to make elections on Shabbos is an inyan of Uvdin Dechayl, it's vachadike things. I was sitting with a smile and waiting anxiously somebody should come over from the Chutz La'aretz, the Sefer Torah committee, and also take a bottle of mashke. At the end of the Farbrengen, yes, Reb David Raskin. At the end of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe also spoke about the importance again of reaching out to every Yid. And here the Rebbe referred to the expression ha'etzem kishat ha'toifes b'miktzasoi at ha'toifes b'kuloi. This is an expression which is quoted often in Hasidus, which means that the etzem of a Yid, and every Yid is an etzem, is a part of the Reibish, as a chelek alakam imal mamish. When you have them partially, it's considered like you'd have it fully. What's the pshat? Rebbe said that at times we get close to a Yid, and we only have him miktzasei, we only have him partially. Your toifis b'miktzasei. But you should know at the same time, at the toifis b'kula, you're really holding kula, you're holding him completely. What's the pshat completely? Who is the complete? The complete is the Rebishter. The Rebishter can be referred to as the complete. He is a kuloi. The Mela, we should know that when we get close to a Yid, and we are teifes b'miktzasei, at the time we only grab miktzas of this Yid, we're only grabbing only part of this Yid. We should know at the same time, really we are grabbing hold of the godliness of the getlachkeit that is within this Yid. And further the Rebbe stressed, being that the Rambam tells us that one deed and one action of a person can have an effect not only on the person and his environment, but can have an effect and an impact on the entire world. By one ma'isa achas, by one deed. The Rebbe says, when we're grabbing hold of one Yid, and at this time we're only grabbing him partially, we don't even have him fully, we should know at the teifes bekulei, this may be something which may have an impact on kulei, on the entire world and on the entire of Klal Yisrael. This is how we are supposed to cherish and look up to every pe'ula toiva, every good deed that can be done, to bring closer Yid, a little bit closer and another little bit closer to the Reibishter, to Getlachkeit and to Yiddishkeit, that it has such a strong effect as a etzem keshat ha'teifes b'miktzasei at ha'teifes b'kulei. After the Rebbe spoke about the Inyan of Sefer Torah, the Rebbe also said to sing in Nigen of a Simchas Torah Dikke Nigen, which has a shaychus to Sefer Torah. And towards the end of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe told to sing the Alter Rebbe's Nigen, which, the famous Alter Rebbe's Nigen, which was composed of the four 4 parts, which is something which is usually not sung at Shabbos Dike Farbrengen, usually only at the Yontav Dike or at the Chassidish Yomim Tovim or regular Yomim Tovim. The Rebbe told it to be sung at the Reis Farbrengen with a Nigen Hachana, with a preparation Nigen before that. And towards the very end of the Farbrengen, right after that, the Rebbe also instructed to sing B'nei Heichalo, which is a Shalosh Shudas Dike Nigen, which is also a composition of the Alter Rebbe. Towards the end of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe also spoke about the greatness of Malava Malke. The Rebbe said Malava Malke is that of a great meal, that though we eat it after we have already made Havdalah, which means already we have parted from the Shabbos, we have already said Hamavdal ben Kodesh L'chayil, we're already into the weekdays. Still we see that in Shulchan Aruch there's a special siman. This is in the regular Shulchan Aruch as well as in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, which tells us about the importance of this meal. And the Alter Rebbe, and that's why the Rebbe says it's mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch, and it's a Jewish custom to eat this meal of Malava Malke, and it's referred to as Malava. We bid farewell to the Malka, to the queen. The Rebbe says that in Shulchan Aruch it's mentioned not only is it to the queen, but it's to the king as well. In other words, the Rebishter, who is considered a king, and Rebbe referred, proper way of achnosas oichim is Eishel. Eishel is an abbreviation of achila shtia, eating and drinking. We're supposed to treat our guests with giving him to eat and giving him to drink. And then there's the lamet. Now, the Rebbe says there are differences in opinion in Svarim what the lamet stands for. There's some claim that the lamet stands for lina. We have the guest, we're supposed to give him achila, shtia, and lina, provide him that he should be able to, for his sleeping, for his lodging over. However, there are others that claim that achila, shtia, is the aleph and the shin, and the lamet stands for lavoya, to baglate him. The mela, this is the whole, in Yiddish it's baglate. Escort him, right. Thank you. To escort him. The Rebbe says it's learned off from the whole idea of Egla Arufa, Yodeinu Le'Shavchos Adam Azem. So from there, Svarim learn up that when we have a guest, it's not sufficient that we only provide him with all his needs of eating and drinking and sleeping, but we also have to provide him, it's honorable and justable to escort him as he leaves. And this is the idea of Malava Malka, the Rebbe says. Pshat is we have the Melech and the Malka, which stands for the Rebishter, on Shabbos, and we show special celebration in the fact of by making a special meal. The Rebbe says it's a custom, a Jewish custom. Not only is it a special meal, but it's a meal that comes with zmiras, with special singing to it, and all different types of singing, which shows the celebration of this Malava Malke. So this shows us how great the Indian of Suda de Malava Malke is. And also Malava Malke is referred to as Suda de David Malke Meshicha. It's referred to as the meal of David HaMelech, Melech HaMashiach. The Rebbe said, hopefully, by celebrating Malava Malke properly, this will lead to it that we will be able to come to be zeicha to have Mashiach immediately as we express in the thought of Malava Malke. It's Suda David Malke Mashiach. Memele, it should bring to Malke Mashiach. And here the Rebbe also mentioned it would be most appropriate, Rebbe said, to announce at the Farbrengen that tonight there's a fundraising Malava Malke for Machon Chana, which now that the Rebbe discussed the greatness of the idea of Malava Malke, it should be announced again to urge everyone to participate. And in this Malava Malke for the Institute of Machon Chana. The very end of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe said we are now concluding Parshas Beshalach. We're going out of Parshas Beshalach into Parshas Yisroi. And what is the whole idea of Yisroi? The whole idea of the Seder of Yisroi is Matan Torah. That's what the whole main contents, the main incidents which took place in Parshas Yisroi is the fact of Matan Torah. B'negeye, Bias HaMashiach, we find that the expression is Me'ein zeh kvar hoya b'Matan Torah. Alter Rebbe says in Tanya that something similar to what it's going to be like when Mashiach will come was already by Matan Torah. So we see that how great Matan Torah is, it still does not come to the great revelations which are going to be when Mashiach will come. So Rebbe urged and blessed that we should see to it that Taka from this Sedra, now we're entering the Sedra of Matan Torah, not only should it be the great revelations which we had by Matan Torah, but we should Taka come to the tremendous Geluyim which will come with the coming of Mashiach.